Good morning, afternoon. I'm just seeing everyone is starting to join, so I'll let everybody's computer catch up for a moment or two. I just would like to take a moment to welcome everyone to our webinar today, looking at the topic of the interrelation between psychological safety and building productive, inclusive, and healthy workplaces. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the team lead of learning and development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be here with you today helping to host and moderate today's session. I would like to start by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. We always like to start off by thanking our academic team and 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent Project, Harnessing Talent Alliance for recruiting and retaining Canadians with disabilities and mental health challenges, as it is a multi-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada, and this webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC, as well as memberships to WWI, the Work Wellness Institute. We would always like to thank our advisory committee and, of course, our speakers who contribute to this webinar series. I'll just start with a few technical housekeeping points. Hopefully at this point, you're all able to hear me and seeing the title slide of our presentation today, whether that's through your computer or phone if you've chosen to dial in. We do ask that all participants remain muted throughout the presentation, and hopefully at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar menu, and one of the functions will have that CC on it for closed captionings for anyone that requires it throughout this presentation today. We will ask you to use the chat function, also found at the bottom menu bar, to communicate with us today. So that includes any technical issues you may be experiencing, questions around the content, questions around us, or anything like that. Please feel free to use that chat function to talk with us today. And that's also when you have questions, please submit them through the chat function. And we do encourage that when you have a question, just submit it and we'll deal with it right in time of the presentation and keep that conversation going. But we do also have a dedicated Q&A at the end of this presentation as well, if the questions kind of come to your mind later today. If one of those questions might be what's going to happen once the webinar has ended today, we'll preempt those a little bit and just confirm that this is being recorded today for use for participants to potentially rewatch, as well as to be put on our eCampus post the webinar live today, as well as the presentation materials. Materials. And just a quick note to our members, their automated certificate will happen for you today. So as long as you've set yourself up properly through your registration, you'll receive that automatic certificate. I'm very excited today to be able to introduce Ann Baynton, who is our speaker with us today. As a workplace relations specialist, Ann supports employers, governments, organizations, unions, teams, and associations that wish to resolve issues involving mental health, psychological safety, conflict, or performance concerns. She helps improve working lives while supporting organizational excellence. She served as co-chair of the Technical Committee for the National Standard of Canada on Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, is a member of the Mental Health Commission of Canada's Workforce Advisory Committee, and a member of the Employment Standards Committee for the AODA. We're so pleased to have you here with us today, and I'm very happy to pass things over to you. Thank you so much, Ann.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I have the benefit that Elizabeth went to many of you and asked you what you wanted to hear about. And the two things that came up was really, is there not an easier way to do psych health and safety because it can be overwhelming? And the other one was, we're all stressed out. We're all overwhelmed. There's so much work to do. And how do we manage workload stress? So I'm going to focus primarily on those two questions, and do invite you, though, if there's something else that you wanted covered, just to go on to the chat and ask. Happy to go on to those. So with psych health and safety, what we realized after trying to ram information about the standard and about psychosocial factors down the throats of employers who are completely overwhelmed with trying to run a business and getting very little response, is that we have to take a different perspective on it, that what we were doing wasn't working. So when the standard came out, that's the cover of it there on the screen, in 2013, so it'll be 10 years old next year. It was meant to be a framework so that those organizations who wanted to understand the bigger picture about when do you intervene, how do you intervene, what sorts of things are evidence-based, there were a lot of people who looked at it like, okay, we have to do this, and it just became a checklist. It didn't actually change behaviors. And you see the definition here, that it says a workplace that promotes workers' psychological well-being and works to prevent harm to workers' psychological health in negligent, reckless, or intentional ways. But really, what I say about it is that psychological health and safety comes down to how we treat each other. It's every interaction, every decision, every policy, every program. But if we just make it words on a page or a checklist, we may do a lot of work and not actually have the benefits of change. So we started to look at the fact that, yes, a psychological health and safety management system, which is what's in the standard, is the plan, do, check, act model. I still very much support that for organizations who are mature enough, ready, able, that they've got the resources and the bandwidth to do it. I still highly recommend it. We're looking at the standard in the next year or so to improve it, but there's already been a conversation that we're not going to make it so different that those who have been working on it for 10 years have to start over, but we want it to be both easier to use and more effective. So we will be working on that, and hopefully in 2024 you'll see the updated version. So when I look at the employer's perspective on these things, and especially through this pandemic, most employers are concerned with sustainability of the organization. And this is true because unemployment is really bad for your mental health. So it's really important that they continue to focus on sustainability, that they continue to focus on organizational effectiveness, quality control, the things that maybe it's mergers and acquisitions. We need to see employers who are focused on this, not as not caring, but simply that their priorities are different, that they have other things that are consuming them. And the idea that they're going to take on, because the standard is continual improvement. So if you implement a psychological health and safety management system, it's something you implement and you manage it ongoing. And I really do understand why some employers feel that's overwhelming. So I want to start from the point of view that many employers are doing the best they can, and we need to start where they're at rather than where we want them to be. So when the standard was first released, all of us that are in this field were going around saying, here's the psychosocial factors, here's what they mean, here's what the clauses of the standard are. And I look at that and think, when I take my car into the mechanic, I don't want him to teach me, or her, to teach me about the engine. I want them instead to fix it. And employers are not that different. Why are we trying to teach them the theory behind psychological health and safety instead of focusing on what they can do about it, really getting practical? So there's two.
I found this on the web for behind psychological health.
Sorry, Siri thought I was talking to him. there's two things that are usually preventing employers from being able to look at psychological health and safety. One is time and the other is money. And I'm going to help you deal with both of those challenges. The time one is that if we have another initiative, project, program added to what we're already doing, it can just be too much. Most of us are going at full capacity now, and to keep pushing to do more is not good for our psychological safety. So we want you to consider embedding psychological health and safety in business as usual, rather than making it something that's tacked on, like in workshops or training that are different than what they're doing. And some of the ways are in your existing leadership training. If you have an orientation to being a supervisor or a manager, then embed some of this in there. So it's not an additional task. It's just that you look at leadership training from the perspective of psychological health and safety. And I say, whenever more than one person is involved in an interaction, psychological health and safety is a factor. So look at leadership training and see if you can embed it in there. Regular team meetings. If you took 15 minutes out of your regular team meetings to do something that builds resilience, builds team cohesion, builds emotional intelligence, not only are you improving the team interaction, you're improving the well-being of the individuals on that team, and you're supporting their success on the job. So rather than say, we're going to have a team meeting on this, if it's 15 minutes, but it's repeated every time, you're going to, not the same activity, something different, but if each time you focus on something related, you're going to have more impact than everybody coming away for a workshop and then going back and nothing really changes. There's no follow-up. Even in our virtual meetings, we can do that, add it. Some of you are very highly regulated, so you have a lot of mandatory training that you have to do, whether it's WMIS or something else that is required. Again, even though they are required, they're mandatory, maybe you've got 15 minutes to tack something onto that. You've already got your audience there, they have to do it. And if you could do something then about how we're going to interact, how we're going to do things in a safer way, that could help a lot. When you do onboarding or orientation, this can be critical, that you're setting the expectation with new employees that this is how we show respect, this is how we interact, this is what is considered acceptable, and this is what is considered not acceptable in terms of how we support each other in the workplace. If you do it upfront and early on, there's a free resource on CCOHS called Being a Mindful Employee. And what it does is actually walks employees through the psychosocial factors, but from the point of view of how they impact other people. It's being updated right now, but when it is re-released, again, it's free. You could just say, you need to go on here and do this, or you could assign it and then have them come and talk about it. Lunch and Learn's funny because many of my colleagues feel that that's just putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. But if that's the only opportunity that you have to start to talk about these things, then I say take them. But the way that we do a Lunch and Learn that's psychologically safe is we start 10 or 15 minutes after the hour and we finish 10 or 15 minutes before the hour, so that people can have their lunch, that they can have a break, that we're not just saying, oh, you should work with no break through this whole thing. Sorry about that. if you have a health and safety committee, we created a series of questions related to psychosocial factors so that the health and safety committees can at least once a quarter investigate a psychosocial hazard in addition to the other health and safety hazards that they look at. We need to help them because many of the people might have been trained in occupational health and safety, but don't really understand, well, how do we modify that for psychological health and safety? And your wellness committee, I mean, they're doing things anyways, but what if they could do more related to psychological health and safety? And policies or programs, instead of writing up new policies or starting new programs, what if you just looked at what you already have when it comes up for review, not again as a make work project, but just started looking each time something came up for review and say, what could we do related to this policy or program that might improve the way it protects and promotes psychological health and safety? So embedding in business as usual has the benefit of reaching more employees than a voluntary workshop, being able to link the information to how we connect in the workplace rather than about some theoretical idea, and can start to change behaviors. This is what really needs to happen for psychological health and safety, is we need to change the way we interact so that we do no harm. Now, here's the overall approach, and I will get to you about the money and the budget piece as well, is you start where the employer is at. And what I mean by that is if instead of us saying, you need to do psychological health and safety, you need to make these changes, if we listened to the employer and we understood what was top of mind for them, maybe it's increasing sales, maybe it is a merger, maybe it is employee safety because there's so many injuries. We can always, because every time more than one person's interacting, it's psychological safety, we can always offer a solution that does both psychological health and safety promotion and meets their needs. So starting where the employer is at kind of flips on its head what we have been doing, where we start listening to them first instead. When this proposed solution is in support of their goals, one of the things that happens is you're no longer trying to convince them. You're no longer trying to get buy-in or to sell them on it. Because if I am a leader and I say, look, I've got this thing happening and this is my focus, and you say, I can help you with that, it makes it a lot easier for you and a lot easier for me as the leader to say yes. We want to make the solution practical by embedding it in business as usual, rather than saying, and we need this much more of everybody's time. And we want to make it affordable. And the way that we can make it affordable is to leverage existing free resources. And I'll share some of those with you, but there's a lot all around the world that you can leverage that is evidence-based and very practical, rather than always having to hire from external. So I'm an external consultant who, even so, I think there's so much that can be done. Don't wait till you have that budget. And this is the other thing that I figured out the hard way, because that's how I figure most things out, is that in the beginning, when I was trying to convince anybody of anything, I felt like I had to really cover my butt, show them that I had done the research, have citations, make sure that I explained everything. And I'd have like a 40-page report, right, to suggest an approach. And that is so overwhelming for a busy executive to take the time to read all of that, to go through it all. I did it because I was worried that, especially when I was younger, that my credibility would be questioned. And so I wanted to make sure that they knew I had done my due diligence. What I have found now is that if I put a proposal, especially because it's going to be related to something they said, and to say, you were talking about this issue, and I think I could do this to help you with it. Would you like to talk about it? I can tell you it's way more effective in getting their attention and getting to yes than the big report. And we want to always be evidence informed, have that in your back pocket. To be honest, I never get asked for it. I mean, that's just my principles, is that I'm going to do evidence informed work. So have it there, but just keep it concise. This is what I think we should do. Now, I want to explain to you, and if you've got other situations that you want to talk about, you can bring them forward, but it's how do we do that? You're saying link psychological health and safety strategies to what the employer's desired outcomes are. And I'm going to give you some examples. And if you have other situations you'd like to talk about, then you can bring it up. So let's look at the first one, which is mergers or new locations. And what the employer is concerned about is how do you get these teams now, whether they're a brand new team or they're a merged team, how do you get them up and running as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, right? Because there's going to be all this turmoil. And the other thing is that we know that with mergers or acquisitions or other changes, that often the people from the different groups say, no, that's not the way we did it. Well, this is the way we do it. And it can cause conflict. So what we know from our psychological health and safety strategies is that we can build team cohesion through various team building activities that don't have to take a lot of time, but can get people quickly to know each other and to be able to be up and running effectively. We know that conflict, what's the saying? Conflict is inevitable, combat is optional. And that if we teach everybody how to have a difference of opinion in a respectful and helpful way, that we're looking at the two different opinions and considering the path forward, then all of the people who have come from different organizations or different parts of the organization will be able to be more effective at moving forward. And we know that with policies and processes, that those policies are going to have to be reviewed. Some of them obviously will be scrapped. But if you are part of reviewing the policies because of this merger, you can also look at it from the eye of how could this possibly protect psychological health and safety. Now, the thing is, you're not going to use the language of psychological health and safety at all. You're going to say, I can help you with team cohesion by interacting and doing some team building activities or providing them to leaders. And these in the third column here, these are all free resources that exist with workplace strategies for mental health. But as I say, these are just ones that I've worked on, but there's many more. So you could help out by working with the teams. You could help out by teaching everybody an effective way of resolving conflict. And there's free workshop materials for that. You could intervene by saying, this might be a good time to speak to everybody about their emotional intelligence, which is understanding our emotional reactions and being able to respond to other people's emotional reactions. And for leaders who are going to have new team members, they need to know more about what builds and what destroys trust. Leaders often think it's just, well, I'm honest, so people should trust me. But there's actually 11 criteria for competencies for leaders to be trustworthy. And we could teach that to these leaders that are part of this merger and acquisition. And there's another workshop called Leveraging Team Wisdom, and they're particularly 4 activities where the team starts to appreciate and respect the different qualities, strengths, contributions that their team members have for the team. So we've gone from an issue that the employer has, which is mergers, to what they want, like just get these teams up and running and make sure that our policies and processes are in line, to thinking about what does that have to do with psych health and safety, and then thinking about the very practical ways that you could intervene and do 2 things, right? You are going to be supporting psychological health and safety, but the conversation is about mergers. You're going to support the merger. I'm going to go through a few more of these. Say the issue was turnover, recruitment, or diversity, which of course is a big issue right now. And maybe the employer just thinks, well, that's because employees have no sense of commitment, they are not loyal, they don't care, rather than argue about it, that if we had a psychologically safer workplace, I bet they would stay, and I bet we could recruit, which is probably true, is that you say, well, I could help improve employee loyalty. And the way that I would do that is that I would look at the leadership relationship to the employees and determine what actually gets people to stay versus what might convince people to go. I can look at employee resilience, that maybe people need to be stronger so that they can deal with all of the changes that are happening right now. And just as an aside, I saw employee resilience as a way to blame the victim, meaning you can have a toxic work environment that has conflict, chaos, ridiculous demands. And what you do is you go and tell your employees to be more resilient and suck it up. But what I found out is that I was wrong, that employee resilience means that that employee can either make changes, advocate for changes in the workplace because they're resilient enough to do that, or they can leave because they're resilient enough to do that. So I no longer see employee resilience as blame the victim. I see employee resilience as something that we should do for everybody's psychological health and safety. And we could say, you know, if the issue is diversity, you're spending all this time and money on recruiting a diverse population, I can help you make sure they stay. Because if you recruit them, but nothing changes so they don't feel welcome, they don't feel they belong, then you're going to increase that turnover and it's not going to be great for you. Now, we know diversity is just a numbers game, right? How many people do we have from each category? But inclusion is that sense of belonging. Again, when we look at some of the resources, Psychologically Safe Leader is a way for leaders to understand the extent to which their strategies are psychologically safe and gives them an opportunity to make changes. gives them all the information that they need to do that. When we look at the building resilience workshop, so this is again materials that you could use for free. It's got the facilitator's guide and the slide and the participant handout. You could take the time to work with people to build resilience. Or say you think people have unconscious bias, they just don't understand how they exclude people, then you could run the implicit bias workshop with the teams so that it's a gentle but really effective way of getting people to have their own aha moment. I did this with a leader who is just really a wonderful person. But when I asked how they made people in the 2S LGBTQ community feel welcome, they said, well, how would I know if somebody was in that? And I said, well, do you talk about weddings? Do you talk about families? Do you talk about things like that? And they said, yes. And I said, and do you ever expand it to, families that are not what you would call traditional? And they were gobsmacked because they realized that, of course, they have people from the community in their workplace because they had a large workplace, and that they didn't understand that just not expanding the conversation was exclusionary. And they immediately took steps to change it. So we can help people to learn and to grow. If the issue is employee or patient safety, and what the employer's thinking is, this is really bad for our reputation and we need to fix this, you can look at it in a much more practical way by engaging the people that are at the heart of this, right? If it's patient safety, who is it that takes care of the patients? Well, it's the employees. So what do they need to be able to do that? Well, they might need resources, they might need more time, they might need more staff. But if we could let employees know, we have your back, we're here for you. If something happens, we're going to back you up. It makes it that they're working with less stress and pressure, therefore they're going to be more effective. I was talking to a national retail organization, and they were saying, well, customers sometimes are just cranky and miserable and we got to deal with it. Yeah, but what if your employee is a 16-year-old, their first job, and they've got some adult yelling at them? And what we came up with for this group was, if you see that in the workplace, that another employee should come, stand beside the one who's getting yelled at, look at them, not the customer, because you don't want to be intimidating or you don't want to be rude. Look at them and say, do you need some support? And they just might stand there and do nothing. It's okay. But now that employee feels, I'm okay. There's somebody here. I'm not left out to hang. So there's lots that we can do there. And again, it is psych health and safety, but when we had the talk, it was about improving customer service. Public relations is another one. I can give you an example where a nursing home during COVID got a lot of bad press, and their only focus was, we have to spin this because we're not going to have enough residents, and therefore we're not going to have enough money, and we're not going to be able to manage, and it's so hard for us to recruit. So what we said to them was, we can help by creating ambassadors for your location. And we would do that by speaking to families of patients that are there now and asking them what's good about the place, and what would you like to see changed? And then doing that so that they now become much more committed and supportive, and maybe even speak publicly about why they think this is a good place. And we can go to our existing employees and ask them, what is it that's already good about this place? And what would make it a place where you'd really like to work? And we could take that information, and of course we can't put all of it into play, but we can put enough into play that the people that will do your public relations for you are your employees and the families of your residents. So yes, we're dealing with public relations. We're doing it in a way that's also going to support psychological health and safety. And then the other one that's here that people think, well, there's no relationship between the bottom line, just making money, increasing sales, and psych health and safety. But even in that case, we know that the research ties emotional intelligence directly to increase sales. And that's because if you have higher emotional intelligence, you can read people, you can manage your own emotions. So we could make the proposal that in order to increase sales, we'll work with all of your sales department in order to improve their emotional intelligence, and then measure and see what happens. Well, first of all, emotional intelligence on its own can be used by a psychopath or a sociopath to manipulate people. But since we're doing it, we can teach emotional intelligence and hold people accountable for their actions in a way that both increases sales and supports this cold is hanging in there. So we could do that and make a difference in the sales while we're improving how the team treats each other. So now I'm going to move on to workload stress. And you can read the quote here by Rumi, "Never give from the depths of your well, but from your overflow." Well, I don't think many of us are overflowing these days through the COVID and all the things that we've gone through. But that still doesn't mean that we can't manage workload stress better, differently. And we're going to look at how we can do that. So this is the definition of workload management, which is a psychosocial factor that's part of the standard and part of Guarding Minds at Work. It says a work environment where assigned tasks and responsibilities can be accomplished successfully within the time available. So here's the statements to see if your employees can say these things. Can they say that the amount of work I'm expected to do is reasonable for my position? Can they say I can talk to my supervisor about the amount of work I do? Can they say I have the equipment, resources, and time needed to do my job well? I think about the nurses, especially in the beginning of COVID, and there wasn't a lot of resistance to working hard. But when they were told that they had to do their work without the personal protective equipment, without the resources needed to treat people well in the hospital, that's when the burnout started. That's when they began to leave in droves because they didn't have what they needed to do their job. And can they say that their work is free from unnecessary interruptions and disruptions? This is most important when somebody is exhausted, stressed, or burned out, because if they can focus on one thing at a time and try to get a task done, they're going to be a lot more effective and their stress will be a lot less than if they're constantly going from one thing to another and being interrupted. And there are ways that we can improve that. And do they have control not over what they do, right? You're an employee, you're going to do what the job entails, but do you have control over how you prioritize it? So if I know I have higher energy in the morning, that may be when I want to do my complicated tasks. If I know that I do better finishing one thing at a time, then I would be able to do it. What control do the employees have over their work? Now, there's lots of things that we can do to address this workload stress. And it's not necessarily about doing less work. If you think back to a time when you were working on a project that you were very passionate about, excited about, you probably did more work in a day than you would normally do because you're energized, you're focused, you're passionate about it. So it's not the amount of work we do in the hours that we have. And we need to understand that working hard is not bad for our mental health at all. If I work really hard for 8 hours a day or 7.5, whatever it is, it actually can be very supportive of mental health and well-being. It really is about how you feel about the work you do, meaning, do you feel that what you're doing matters? Do you feel that it's contributing to something? Do you feel that you're appreciated for it? And, I can't talk about stress without talking about those people who are perfectionists. And you know who you are. You're probably listening to me right now. And I want you to understand that perfectionism is anxiety, because it's an impossible goal. And often we feel that we're striving for perfection. We feel like we're never good enough, that we need to do better, do more. Not only is that putting you right in the path of burnout, but it also really reduces the quality of your life. So if you understand perfectionism, it usually comes from that fear of judgment from other people or fear of failure. And when you are really confident, when you are at a stage in your work or your life where you know you can do this, then you're going to do your best, but you're going to understand that it will never be perfect. And that's all right. So we need to teach this to people because we are often taught that we should always be the winner. We should always get an A. We should always get the gold medal. We should always, go the extra mile. But more and more it's backfiring because we're burning people out. I said to you about feeling that what you do matters. And this is something that I think we misunderstand. We really need to let people know how they contribute to the team, how they contribute to the organization, and how they contribute to the greater good. I was talking to a group of union reps on this, and they said, but that's ridiculous because some jobs just aren't that valuable and nobody's going to care. And I said, oh, like what? And they said, well, like the janitor, they're just cleaning up garbage. Like, how's that ever going to feel valuable? I said, that's a funny thing you said, because my mother was a janitor and she felt very valued. The principal in the school where she was a janitor said she was keeping the children healthy and giving them a great environment to learn and to play. And the teachers in the school treated my mother like she was a colleague. She was included in everything. She was not the janitor. She was one of them. So we can help everybody to see their value, which then reduces the stress that comes from thinking, I'm less than, nothing I do matters, that nobody cares about the work I do, and why should I put the effort in? And then there's this, that companies often miss, they're routinely blinded to the important role that B players serve in saving organizations from themselves. And what this is referring to is that there's people who come in at 9 o'clock, quietly do their work, leave at 5 o'clock, and that's it. And they're not a star performer. They don't want promotion. They're not ambitious. But these people are often the rock, the foundation. Yeah, you get your star performers and they come and go and they want to move on. But there's people that just want to come in and do a decent job and go home because there's more to their life than work. And I think we underestimate the value that these folks provide. And this recent term, quiet quitting, is when somebody is that hustler, that person who's really ambitious, that's really a star performer, says, you know what, it's not worth it. My relationships, my health, my well-being is all being compromised. What quiet quitting is saying is they just decide to become what Harvard Business Review called a B player. They just decided they're going to not work to live. No, not live to work, but work to live. And from an employer's perspective, there's nothing really wrong with that if they're doing the job they were hired for. When I look at work stress, I look at, now this is for some of you, you're not old enough. This was before computers. This is what we would have as inboxes and outboxes like that. So if you can imagine that you and I both have this overflowing inbox, lots of work to do. And my boss says to me, you better get this done. If you don't get it done, we could lose this client, we could lose this project, you could lose your job, and it's got to get done. I don't care how you do it, but do it. And your boss says to you, you know, we're always going to have more work than we can do. Would you like some help prioritizing? And then all I want from you is do the best you can. And I'll keep in touch. We'll look at the priorities. We'll get through those, and then we'll reprioritize the rest of it. Who do you think is going to be more effective in work? Who do you think is going to be more focused, more able to think critically and to get through it? And you know the answer to that, right? The one that hasn't been threatened and stressed and pressured is going to do better work. So we really want to focus away from time management. What can you do in 15 minutes and get all this done? To looking at energy management. And if you haven't looked at the work of Tony Schwartz with the Energy Project, he talks about the fact that if we take regular breaks, if we work reasonable hours, over time, we are way more productive. So those of you who think that skipping your breaks, skipping your lunch, working all hours of day and night is because you care about your organization, I want you to think again, because the evidence does not support that. What the evidence says is if you manage your energy, manage your well-being, then you're going to do more. So I've got a few, I'm just wondering, Elizabeth, if there's any questions.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of come on the air as well that we are reaching about 10 minutes before the top of the hour. So if we're able to wrap up, and then I'll also reiterate to the audience, please send through questions and we can end this time together with questions as well as any further content as well.
Great. Okay. So you can come back on and just let me know when you have a question.
Absolutely.
And I'll quickly go through these. There's so many different ways of improving work stress. One is actually figuring out what people are doing. And nobody's going to want to keep a schedule of what they do every 15 minutes. But the thing is, what you learn from that is so important, because so often people are doing things that their manager doesn't know they're doing. And those things might be that a task takes longer than the manager thought, that there's more things on your plate than they knew. Clarifying helps. Identifying what's getting in the way of you doing the work is also really important. Instead of feeling like you're a failure or your employee's a failure, to say, let's look at this. How could we make this more efficient? How could we make this easier for you? And to understand that prioritization is so important, because if your employees know what matters to you, then they're much more likely to get the things done that are going to matter to you. If they don't know, and that's commander's intent, it's a military term that says, if things go sideways, our goal is to take this hill. Well, in business, if things go sideways, what's most important is that we manage our customer relationships, whatever it is, make it clear. And if you're an employee thinking, well, how do I say to my leader what I need? There is a way to do it that you're not complaining, you're not being emotional, you're just saying, I want to be a good employee. And I need your help to prioritize tasks so I know I'm doing what matters most to you. I want to tell you what I need from you to do my best work and what I will do to support myself, to be successful on the job. And I also want to share with you how to give me feedback so that I can hear it and respond. So lots of stuff there where you don't need to say, I'm stressed, I'm burned out. If you feel that that might make you look weak, or you can do it from the perspective of, I want to be a good employee. And then I'm going to stop here, Elizabeth, and let you, yeah.
Jump in on a question here. So question around task-based work versus the hours required. So just wanting to open that conversation, working in a world perhaps where there's this expectation of 8 hours a day, but maybe turning that on its head a little bit and looking about how much hours actually take a task, and looking at things that way. And just if there's anything that you have to comment on that, or maybe projects or evidence that's kind of in the works around that idea.
Yeah. So there's, when I talked about what you do every 15 minutes, there's a process that I suggest both for leaders and employees, where you take the tasks that you're assigned and you put down the amount of time that each of those tasks take. And rather than you saying, I can't do it all, it becomes a mathematical equation. Here's all the tasks. Here's the amount of time. These are the hours that I work. What would you like me to do differently? And just push back in a respectful way, not saying I can't do everything. You're just saying, because it could be the task itself shouldn't take that long, or that the manager doesn't know it does take that long. So yeah, that's how you go from frustration to clarity.
No, I think that's a great practical way to think about that, for sure. Thank you.
Any other?
Yes. So coming back to the idea of, as you mentioned, diversity, it's such a topic right now and on the docket for a lot of agendas. And the feeling of belonging is such an integral piece of that. And just wanted to talk a little bit more around, you gave that a great example of just simply thinking about expanding the conversation to include kind of multiple family lives in that, and wanted to see if there are other effective strategies to help implement that? And also, how do you look around and take that pulse of how people are feeling belonging in the workplace?
Mhm. So, I mean, it depends on your relationship. If,
Hmm.
what I would do as a leader myself is sit down with my team and say, I'd like to be a better leader. And I'd like you to have the best kind of work experience that you can, given our limitations with resources and whatever. And I would like all of you to write what you think we could do better and what would allow you to feel that you belong. And you can hand them in um, confidentially, anonymously, or you can tell me that it's from you. But this is your opportunity to affect change. And I can do that for all of us. Now, I'm also working on something called Psych Safe Teams, and there's a portion in there that is all about inclusion, and that a leader could go to their team and really get those measurements. And then the other thing I'd say is that the Guarding Minds that's going to come out in February also has indicators of inclusion. So inclusion is psychological safety. The difference is we're looking at it for different groups, but just
Hmm.
because you belong in a particular group doesn't mean that you're going to think or need what everybody else does.
Yes, certainly that individual approach, right? I think
Yeah.
that's a great way to think of it. And I know there's also a question around that's wonderful, like you said, around if you have that relationship, but if you're looking at an organizational, is there a way to do that that might not tack on another survey or those that might not feel how confidential is this survey truly? How do you kind of combat those kinds of feelings?
Yeah, and there's something we did building trust for leaders, because in some organizations you really need to go back to that. If there is no trust, if it's all cynicism and skepticism, then you have to start there. You're not going to start with saying, let's be inclusive, because nobody believes that you mean it or it's going to be done. And I think trust is the foundation, right, for psychological safety. And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect to have trust, but it does mean that your intention and integrity has to be impeccable.
Absolutely. And I think it was so, this is a personal side note, that you had the 11 competencies of trust. And I think that's something that could be quite eye-opening, that again, you think, well, we have open, honest communication here. What more do I need? And there could be quite a lot more to that iceberg, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and people say we have lots of communication and it's all a bunch of group emails and nobody
Right.
feels like they're actually connecting and communicating.
Yeah, no, that's very true, especially in this time when we're all trying to figure out this new hybrid or flexible. Even though we've been here for a couple of years now, it still feels like we're still trying to figure out the best way to keep those ties strong.
Yeah.
And then I think we just have time for one last question, and this is coming from that idea of perfectionism and how can one leader here support a team member that is a perfectionist and show that it's, that's not needed to be, the star performer kind of thing.
Yeah. For myself as a leader, I do things like I refuse to let people work overtime unless they tell me what it's for and we try to problem solve. Could you do it otherwise? I take things away from them when I say to them, I want you to take it to this level, and then I'm going to have somebody else review it or do something else, so that they don't feel like the end product is all their responsibility. I also talk often about the mistakes that I made and how I fixed them, or
Mhm.
I'll talk about a mistake I made and ask how they would fix it, so that this idea that we can make mistakes, we can have failures, we can do less than great work and still survive and thrive becomes part of the culture.
Yeah, that vulnerability, right? That you get to share your mistakes so others feel safe to do so as well. I think that's a great thing to point out. And I will squeeze in one last question that just came in, also saying wonderful points, Marianne. So thank you so much from our audience right off the bat. So when engaging with employers on psychological safety, we have to learn to use the language that they can relate to around their concerns, things like that. And are just wondering, how do you communicate this change to a CEO or maybe owner that's maybe been successful in an quote older system or different way of doing things? And are there general differences in the perception of these strategies, perhaps thinking around strategies of retention, recruitment, all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, and I think that we don't want to say to the CEO, you're old school and you're harmful to people. But what we can say is, with this newer batch of employees, we've asked them what motivates them, what helps them to do good work. And these are some of the things that we know can help you get better performance. And so you make it in their best interest rather than a criticism of them.
Mm-hmm. With the win-win-win kind of approach, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We have reached our hour. Actually, we're a minute or two over. So I do want to say thank you so much, Marianne, for sharing your expertise, your time, all of these wonderful practical interventions and ways to think about psychological safety. And I think you've brought some really good thought-provoking ways to change the conversation and hopefully create productive conversations on this important topic as well. So thank you so much for your time with us today. As our audience is aware, this is a two-part program day. We have been so lucky to have Ann Baynton as our keynote ahead of our annual general meeting. So we will be moving to that portion of our agenda today, if you will. So just a reminder that we have recorded this presentation, and it will be sent to participants today for recorded purposes as well as on our e-campus. And as our members are aware, you will receive your certificate of attendance automatically. And if you're looking to become a member, please check out our website, workwellnessinstitute.org, and you can look at the membership section as well as request a membership through our membership services at workwellnessinstitute.org email inbox. When our session ends today, if you have to pop off now or if you're going to stay through to AGM and later, there should be an evaluation survey that comes on for you. And we really appreciate you taking that time to fill out that survey and make sure that we're having relevant and timely content for our audience.